Year 6, welcome to Tuesday's Storytime. So today we're on chapter 9 of Skycircus. The children, Lily, Robert, and along with Tolly, have been taken. Actually, no, sorry, Tolly wasn't taken, was he? So the children, Robert and Lily and Malkin, have been taken on the hot air balloon, if you like, that's carrying the Skycircus. So we'll have to see what happens to them today. Lily clasped Malkin in her lap and huddled close to Robert. The cargo bay was remarkably chilly. She looped her scarf twice more around her neck, and then handed the other end of it to Robert to wind around his. She was grateful now that Mrs. Rust had not been able to stop knitting, for the scarf was easily long enough for both of them to wear. A dim light set in the ceiling glowed at regular intervals, revealing brief glimpses of the wild beasts now cowering in their cage and the horses shifting in their stalls. The groan of the engines as the skyships chugged along, full steam ahead, mingled with the animals' intermittent yelps and cries. Lily felt like crying too. Some birthday this had turned out to be. Madame Lionsmane, Slimwood, and their accomplices had used Mamma's notebook, the birthday poem, and the tickets to entice her to the show, then caught her unawares and snatched her away like a prize, along with Robert and Malcolm. But why? And what dreadful scheme did they have in store for her? The cock-heart. But she felt sure now that it was the very reason they'd kidnapped her. She racked her brains, trying to think of what use it might be to them, but could come up with nothing. Instead, she kept circling back to how idiotic she'd been to fall for their tricks in the first place, and to get Robert and Malkin kidnapped too. She chided herself for such blatant stupidity. Would she never learn? She seemed to repeat her mistakes endlessly, like the hours on a clock face. Only Robert's chattering teeth interrupted her self-recrimination. I hope Tolly makes it back to Bracken Bridge, he muttered, and tells everyone what's going on. Me too. Lily pulled her coat tight around her. And please let help come before we die of hypothermia. Robert rubbed his hands together and pulled down the brim of his cap. My face is froze. My bones are froze. My nose is froze. Even my toes are froze. I feel like I've got icicles in my hair. I'm not surprised, Malcolm replied darkly. I swear by Noah himself there's no heating on this ridiculous balloonatic flying ark. His eyes were practically slits. He stood and shook out his fur. We should have stayed at the party, Lily. Stop complaining, both of you, Lily snapped. I need to think. She closed her eyes, searching once more for a solution. Even if she were able to pick the lock on the cargo bay door, they were miles in the air, too high to jump. Besides, hadn't they heard the sound of bolts on the outside being pulled across? She'd never get through. And when they'd first taken off, she probed the rest of the room to find there was no other way out. There was no use. Any plan she had made would have to factor in those problems, and right now the worry of where they were, or what might happen when they got there, was busily worming its way inside her, taking up all her brain power. I suppose being kidnapped on your birthday is marginally better than being ignored, she said at last, not to try and cheer herself up than for any other reason. You shouldn't have come with me, either of you. I've been far too foolish. Got you both abducted, and Tolly in trouble to boot. Half an hour passed, and the silence was only interrupted by the odd splutter of the engines, or the occasional snarl and shriek of the animals, while each of them remained lost in their thoughts. We'll take it in turns to rest, Malcolm suggested. One of us needs to keep watch at the porthole, in case we pass a clue to where we're headed. Robert shook his head. It's pitch black outside, Malcolm. We won't see a thing. It's more important to cheer ourselves up. He squeezed Lily's shoulder. What time is it? Lily consulted her pocket watch. 11:25. Well, then it's still your birthday. Let's do something to celebrate. I, for one, am starving. Robert took out the box of chocolates and opened it. 12 truffles in frilly white paper cups nestled in the box. Each was topped with a coloured jewel of candied fruit. They reminded Lily of the costumes of the circus performers. She picked one and popped it in her mouth. It had a soft, praline centre. She mumbled through her mouthful. Robert ate one too. It was nuggety and stuck to his teeth in chewy chocolate lumps. Lily chose another, candied ginger. another the rose cream. She was relieved to find that none of them tasted of stickerish licks, or any of the odd flavours Oggy the Clown had bandied around when he gave them to her. In fact, the chocolates tasted so good, they were so hungry, soon they were gorging their way through the whole box. When they finished the first layer, they discovered a whole extra one underneath, and ate those too, smushing them together into glorious sugary lumps in their mouths and stuffing the empty paper wrappers into their pockets. Malcolm didn't partake. He was a mechanimal. After all, a mechanimals never ate, not even in dire circumstances, and certainly not chocolate. Lily took out the notebook and read from it to cheer them up. Reading aloud reminded her of the bedtime stories Mamma used to tell her. Thursday, the 21st of September, 1867, Easton College. I am one of the first female students to declare my intention to become a mechanist. I'm attending classes in science, engineering, and mathematics. If I can complete the courses, I may be able to work at the Mechanist Guild in London. Not as a mechanist, of course. Those jobs are only available to men currently. So my professor, Dr. Droz, tells me, although I intend to see about that. Lily tapped the page with her finger. Droz, she said. Why does that name ring a bell? Robert yawned through his last mouthful of truffle. I have no idea. Neither do I. Malcolm stuttered, his eyes flickering. He was running out of ticks. If they didn't wind him soon, he'd be asleep. Never mind. Lily read on. Dr. Droz intends to put in a good word for me at the Guild and suggested I might obtain a position there as an assistant, or a punch card operator in the Department of Mathematical Engines. It would be a good start, a chance to work with world-famous professors, and to see the machines of Charles Babbage and Ada Lovelace up close. I would love to learn something of Ada's work, not only on the original Babbage engine, though I was furious to discover Ada's part had not been given due credit here, but on her flyology project as well. Lily remembered the conversation Anna had been having earlier that evening with that mechanist from the Guild. That was where she'd heard the name Droz. He mentioned Dr. Droz alongside Papa and Professor Silverfish. Something to do with hybrids and having been kicked out of the Guild. But Droz had taught Mamma too, and Mamma's words seemed so wise. Before she'd received the notebook, Lily had barely thought of Mamma as anything other than, well, Mamma. But now, reading the pages aloud, she realised there was a whole other side of Grace Fairfax that she'd missed. Mamma had her own life, separate from Lily's and Papa's, her own dreams she'd wanted to achieve. And here she was, telling them to Lily as if, well, they were in the same room together. It was funny how someone who'd been gone so long could be brought back to life through their words. Lily was finding Mamma could still surprise her, even though she wasn't there to do it in person. She wished her Mamma was really there, to tell her how brave she was and to offer encouragement for the predicament they were in, to tell her not to stop asking questions until she found the right answers that would help them get out of here. Lily realised her mind had drifted far away from the book. The others hadn't even noticed. She glanced at Malkin and saw he'd wound down. Robert had dozed off. The empty chocolate box lay tipped to one side in his lap. She was starting to feel a little woozy herself. Not quite all there. One of them had to stay awake. That's what they decided, wasn't it? In her sleepy state, she couldn't quite remember. Suddenly, Lily felt more tired than she had been in her entire life. She rubbed her eyes and tried hard to concentrate, squinting at the next diary entry. The words crawled spiderishly across the paper. She tried to corral them together, but they would not become sentences. And when she looked up from the page, the room was swaying. She closed the book and laid her head on her arm. And then, just like that, she was somewhere else. No longer stretched out in the cold cargo bay, but sprawled beneath a chair in the parlour of her old house in Riverside Walk, Chelsea. The ammonite stone was clasped in her hand, and a flickering fire in the grate warmed her socked feet, which were propped on the edge of the hearth. If she put her chin on her hands and looked upwards, she could glimpse Mamma's feet. Her satin slippers poked out from beneath her long dress as she placed it to and fro across the carpet, holding the red notebook open in her hands and reading aloud from it. Lily tried to call to her, but when she opened her mouth to speak, no words came out. She could find them neither on the tip of her tongue or hidden away deep inside her. So she closed her eyes and fell into a deep, uninterrupted slumber. Well, there we go. Thank you for joining me. Come back tomorrow and we'll continue with chapter 10.